Hello everybody, another drawing video. I'm going to do a little bit of a tutorial about me drawing Pocahontas. So you'll see here, this is the end result of the drawing. So now let's get to how we actually did it. So number one, it's always about structure. So I start everything off by doing kind of these stick figures. What I found is whenever we do these, one of the things you really got to practice is how people actually stand in real life. And what I mean by that is I used to kind of have this very flat style where people were just not, very symmetrical. It looked like something virtually right out of a comic book or a movie poster, but it didn't look realistic. So one of the things you can study is just look at how people actually stand, how the body kind of leans in perfectly to one side or the other, where people place their arms. You can see I was kind of debating if I wanted to have one arm behind or if I wanted to put it up. I decided to put it up, holding what turns out to be a spare. But once I get that basic stick figure, I put a little bit of a lean in there, and then I draw from the inside out. So next what I'm going to do is create the head. I put the basic lines there. I always like to put a horizon line. It's just a good habit. And then once I've got that structure down, that's going to be my stick figure outline. And then because I'm doing this digitally, I then put another layer on top. I lighten that first layer and I use that as the basis to draw the details. If I'm doing this physically, I'll erase that just to the point where I can barely see the lines and then draw over there. So I'm always basing everything on that structure. I always like to start in the head because I feel that the head is kind of the emotion and the essence and the spirit in the center of every drawing. So I do the head, I do a basic outline, then you'll see me zoom in onto the eyes because there is nothing more important when it comes to drawing a person than the eyes. What I noticed here is I looked at the hair and I was trying to get the actual hair underneath the headband, but it made the face look a little bit funny, and you'll see here that I started adjusting it. I kind of felt that it made her look a little masculine with the bottom of the jaw popping out a little bit. So I did make one adjustment. I initially over adjusted because I wanted to make sure that it was a kind of a slim face, and I probably went a little bit too far. But again, what I'm saying is when we go from the face, we get those structures in. We want to make sure that we put the eyes in, and the eyes are the key, guys. If anything else gets screwed up in the drawing, we generally don't notice it, but if the eyes are screwed up, it's the first thing that gets noticed, so focus on that. So what I like to do is I like to kind of have a visual, imaginary point of which that person is looking at, and then I kind of keep adjusting the eyes to make sure that, yes, is this person actually does this person look like they're looking at that point, or does it look like they're, looking sideways or something else like that? So we make sure that we have those eyes. The other thing is they've got to be about the same size. The irises, which is the circles in the eyes with the color, make sure they're the same size. Also, another mistake people make is the eyes are off level. You'll have one eye kind of way up here and the other one way down there. Make sure that they're nice and symmetrical and they're nice and level, so they're in the same kind of plane of existence. You don't have a floating eye anywhere. But again, that's kind of the key with this. And when it comes to the shapes itself of the eyes, in this case I'm doing an almond shape, almost a slightly Asian shaped eyes, where the inside of the eyes are a little below the outside of the eyes, and that was based on what was shown in the Disney film Pocahontas. So obviously I'm making this a little bit more realistic in that spectrum, but that's where the basis is. So as we go here, we're just gonna add a little bit of the eyelashes, a little bit of thickening of the lines around the eyes, and that's going to give it a little bit of an extra shape. Now as we move on, we're gonna continue just little upgrades. So what I am doing here, you see, I knew that the hair was going to be dark. So because I knew that there's going to be a lot of dark hair, I decided to just do a loose structure of the outline, because I figured the shadows will kind of cover up the little details. So you'll see on the left side here, her right side, I had the hair kind of braided, but instead of actually drawing the braids out initially, I just did the outline of how it would look as it goes from being just kind of loose hair into that braid. And I was talking about this earlier, I didn't like that structure. It looked a little too manly. It looked like the face was just a little too big and the jaw was just a little too wide, so I adjusted slightly. I thought that the eye structure and the nose structure and the mouth structure was decent, so I shrunk it down. But then when I adjusted the face, I slimmed it down. What I realized is that mouth was just a little too wide still. It just didn't look right. So I, once again, decided to redraw it a little bit. And the thing is, whenever you have these kind of 3/4 looks, where the character's looking not directly towards you and not away from you, but they're looking at this kind of 3/4 look, the mouth becomes very, very important and a very key detail, because you know what? It's gotta look right, and it's not symmetrical anymore. One side is actually a lot smaller than the other side, at least from the center of the face. So anyhow, I started adding a little bit of details. I decided to put a little feather in the cap because I think there was a scene in Pocahontas where she has that, but actually, as I think about it, that's probably something I made up in my mind. So initially I was going to kind of give her the same dress that Pocahontas had, but I said, you know, that's kind of boring, you know, what's in the cartoon. Let's kind of give her a little bit more skin, you know. Again, we're a little bit provocative here over the Magnificent One channel. So decided to kind of give her a little bit of a loincloth look, and then just kind of, I guess, the old version of a tank top. So one of the things that I like to do is, as I go through, I kind of go bottom down and I'll do layers of detail. So what I mean by that is, I've done the structure, I've done the eyes, I've done the face, I've got a decent amount of detail there, and then I got to make the rest of the body kind of match that level of detail. So I'll go from the top, I'll go down, I'll kind of get that outline, that sketch, but it's not completed. It's not a whole lot of detail, it's just going through there. You'll see there that I realized as I looked at the picture as a whole, as I stepped back and looked at it, the head had shrunk just a little too much, so I brought it up a little bit, adjusted it a little bit forward. So this is what's really cool about drawing digitally when it comes to hair, is you can actually make the lines, individual lines, and then kind of scribble over it, and then you can actually erase on top of it. And use that digital, in this case I'm using an Apple Pen, just to go over it again, and then recolor, erase, recolor, erase. And what it does, it gives this really cool effect where it turns out really nice. I think it's really smooth. It kind of gives this sense of you having this smooth hair from a distance, this long flowing hair. And then I did something similar when it came to the braiding side of it. But the key to this too is, one thing you'll notice, and I say this over and over and over again, is think about the shadows. Guys, I gotta tell you, nothing makes a drawing pop more than the shadows. So you can see, even as I speak, I'm starting to think about where's that light source coming. So in this case, it's going to be on the upper right hand of the page, and it's going to come down and start casting shadows. You'll see that a little bit on her chest, on the bottom half of that where it's being casted. And then as I draw the hair, you know, I do like to kind of black out chunks of figures. I just think it makes it a cool look. It makes things pop a little bit. So I kind of figure, where am I going to do that? Initially, I thought about just doing that with the arm. But then as I looked at it, I realized is the undershadows there in the loincloth, which I've just filled in. You can see that. And then eventually what I'm going to do is I'm going to do her right leg. It's just going to be completed in shadow. There's going to be a little bit of a shadow here in the arms as well, but you don't want to overdo it. And to be quite frank, the way I'm drawing shadows, I'm doing it dynamically, so I'm not doing it as if they were actual shadows. What I mean by that is, to do real shadows, you've got to have almost like perspective. You have an origin point of the light, and then you start drawing kind of these lines to see where the shadows cast. I did something where I just put the shadows roughly in places where they could be if the light's coming from the upper right hand side, but it's more just there to make things pop, more to be dynamic, not very realistic. What you're seeing here, guys, is you're seeing me go over that hair over and over and over again. And then as I try to add detail, there's this kind of cool little concept you can use, and it's the concept of detail contrast, where I will have areas where there's almost nothing. You know, you'll see that in the arms, you'll see that in the stomach, you'll see that in parts of the leg, followed by small areas where there's tons and tons of details. So a great example of that, for example, will be right in her shirt. You'll see how there's kind of that open area in the shirt which has no details in the front side, but then as we get into the folds, there's lots and lots of little folds that I'm going to end up putting in there. Now, I put a couple of feathers in there. I don't know how historically correct this is. This is really based off of, I'll be frank with you, this is people I've seen in like cosplay and Halloween costumes, so forgive any inaccuracies of this, because I did not do a lot of research in this. This was just somebody asked me if I could draw Pocahontas, so I said of course I can, and let's make a video about it, right? And now I'm filling a little bit of shadows. When you look at, for example, kind of where the butt cheeks are, there's a little bit of shadow there. What I like to do is just straight lines. Sometimes you can cross hatch, but when it comes to drawing skin and drawing kind of anything that's biological versus mechanical, anything organic I find actually comes off better if you just use straight lines to shade versus cross hatching. I don't know what it is, but it just, when you cross hatch on something organic, a lot of times it just comes off a little non-believable. For some reason, I can't explain it. It's one of those visual things, right? I went through here and I'm doing the, in her head, man, I'm literally, it's so funny because you can't see it. When I'm drawing these things, I get this super zoomed in, right? So I'm making these individual little tiny squares that make up each one of these bands. It's something that's taken me like, minutes at a time to do. And when you zoom out, you don't even notice it, which is really kind of funny. So it shows you the amount of details that a lot of times go into drawing that 99% of people will not see. One important aspect of that too is the difference between physically drawing on a big sheet of paper, if I'm drawing on like an 11 by 17 piece of paper, versus digitally, is often when I'm drawing, I'm so zoomed in, I'm doing those details, that it'll actually from time to time have a lot of detail in one area, but it's not aligned, it's not in proportion to the bigger area. And that's, if you remember at the beginning of this, when I was looking at the head and the head was, too big then too small, that's because what you don't see here is I'm zoomed in on the head, drawing it, making my adjustments. Then when I zoom out, I go, whoa, this thing is way off. What's going on? Why is this head so small? Why is it so big? Why is it all out of place? And that's the one watch out that you really have to have when it comes to digital drawing, is making sure things are properly aligned with each other. That's probably one of the biggest tips I can have, is just put it on the timer. If you're going to be drawing for a couple hours, excuse me, just every 15 minutes so make it a habit to zoom out and check. That way you don't get to a point where you've done all this detail, all this great work, and then you zoom out and the head looks funny, right? I only recently, probably in the last, actually about a year ago, started doing a lot of digital art. I still do 80% physical art, but about 20% of the time when I'm doing digital art, especially for these videos or when people request me to draw stuff, that was one of the biggest things I found, is I would just be zoomed in all the time, doing this great work, and then it would look super awkward and funny when I zoomed out. So again, figuring out a little bit of details there, a couple more folds, a couple more shadows. A lot of this is just micro adjustments, like I said. This by itself is a pretty decent picture. If I was to chop the hands off and just had this by itself, I could sell this for a couple of bucks, right? But the beauty comes when we go over and we refine and re-refine and re-refine. Somebody once told me that the key to writing a great book or great novel isn't the actual writing, it's just getting the ideas out there and then refining them over and over again. Whether that's the prose, whether that's the actual titles, the structure of it, it's the constant refining of the book, which is where the skill comes in. And so I feel that's the same way with drawing. You get as much of it out there as possible, just to get it on paper or get it on the iPad in this case, or if you're using Photoshop on the computer screen, whatever it is, and then just going back and refining, and then refining a little bit more, a little bit more. If you've ever seen a sculpture work, they chop the basic shapes so quick with a chainsaw, it's not even funny. But then what they're doing is they're spending hours and days, even weeks sometimes, just chipping away the details. And guys, that's what we have to do here, chip away the details. So it's drawing, erasing, drawing, erasing, drawing, erasing. A little different physically. If it was physically, I'd probably take a little bit more time to drawing, and then doing all my finals in inks, to the point where I wouldn't have to do any corrections of the inks. But digitally, man, you just throw that stuff out there and start making your micro adjustments. So this is the basics of the picture. picture. Nothing too much more except to when I start adjusting the hands. The hands are a little bit tricky because you'll find this a lot. If you actually draw hands the way they look, like in real life, they often don't look correct on paper. So it's a weird thing, but especially if you're drawing something like this where hands are dynamically grabbing stuff or they've got their hands wrapped around things, you kind of do a half realistic hand on purpose. Just because of this style, this is black and white, this is kind of, I would call this like comic book style illustration or children's book style illustration. She's a little bit of rock and prose, so maybe not children's style illustration, but you get my point. Is that being the case, we will draw for clarity, not for realism. So that means I'm drawing a left hand that's wrapped around the spare. It's going to be a lot more basic than real hands are, and the shape's going to be slightly different because instead of being, so if you look at fingers, are kind of each joint is kind of shaped like a peanut, but we don't do that in this case because we want clarity. And I'm also not going to draw the overlapping that would realistically be there because you don't see, in this case, 3 or 4 fingers which is so symmetrical and so clearly seen. Real hands, you might see like 2 or 3 that are prominent, the other 2 kind of covered up just by the way, tension of the hand or how tight they're grabbing something. So keep that in mind, is whenever you draw hands, guys, think about clarity, not necessarily realism when it comes to that stuff. Okay? And so even a top hand's tricky. And this is another thing. Remember I was talking about how when you get zoomed in, you tend to draw stuff out of shape. You will see how bad that looks in this picture because one of my hands is gigantic. When I start drawing it, you'll see it. Maybe that's an over-exaggeration in my eyes, but it's gigantic. So one of the most menial tasks of drawing is what I'll refer to as smoothing. So smoothing, or let's just call it smoothing. We don't need that extra syllable in there. It's just, you see how these lines are kind of sketchy? What I'm doing right now is I'm actually going through and I'm erasing all those rough edges and drawing over. Erasing rough edges and drawing over them smoothly. And the reason I do that is because it tends to be a little more clear in the eyes, and especially when I go to color it, even though it looks okay as a black and white sketch, if they've got rough edges, when you color stuff, it looks sloppy because then the colors don't have a smooth edge to them. If it's a bright, vibrant color against a dull background, if there's not a clear delineation between the bright and the dullness, it looks funny. One of the great things about drawing digitally, by the way, straight lines are really easy to do. So this is Procreate, is what I'm using on an iPad Pro. You can just hold the pencil and it creates a straight line. It's awesome. So you can see here the hand on the upper side, it actually looks pretty good. It's a decent hand, but it's gigantic compared to her other hand because it looks like that second joint is as long as her full joints on her other hand. So I had to make an adjustment for that, but I didn't catch it until a little bit later. This a skill of knowing when your artwork looks bad that a lot of artists don't go through, because the danger is when you put all this heart and soul and time into a piece of work is sometimes you get this tunnel vision where you think, man, this looks good. I put the details in. I made that top finger overlap just correctly so it looks dynamically. I put the shadows in. It looks great. And then you forget that maybe if you look at it from a different set of eyes, it's not that great. So there's a couple things you can do. Obviously, the best thing to do, have somebody else look at your work. If you're embarrassed, because it's possible, the other thing you do is look at a mirror. Hold up your artwork to a mirror and see how it looks like. And you'll notice kind of stuff just looks different. Because what's happening is inside your mind, as you create a piece of artwork, you're building it to match that image in your head. And it seems like everything's on track because you're seeing things change a little bit at a time, that you don't catch the big things. And finally, another great thing you can do is whenever you draw something, flip it over. What I mean by that is literally turn the paper upside down, and you will see a lot of flaws that way. There are actually artists out there, they draw upside down for the purposes of, what happens is the mind connects things. So it takes all these broken pieces and it creates its own image to form a whole. It's the gestalt the gestalt of the mind. So even if something is off a little bit, your mind will go, it's close enough, and it'll perceive it as being correct and normal. But when you flip something upside down, you don't have that, because your mind's not necessarily recognizing this as a person staring back at you. They're just recognizing it as a series of lines. So then you see the flaws, you see the asymmetries, you see all that. So that was a bit of a long rant, but it's important. So feathers are really fun to draw, by the way, because they're just lines, but you just sketch dark and then heavy, then light. You do all these different variations because that's the way feathers really are, and it just looks cool. It's like the cool version of hair. Hair is a pain to draw, but feathers are awesome because they're a little bit thicker, so you get a lot more texture and they look cool. So remember I was talking about that shadow? Man, the more shadows you can have, the more levels of black that you have in a picture, unless you overdo it, man, I gotta tell you, that's something that makes pictures pop. There's a great artist named Jay Lee. He was a master of this. You look at his artwork and you go, holy cow, this stuff's amazing. And then you realize like half his work is just dark shadows. Shadows of limbs, shadows of entire bodies, shadows of clothing, shadows of horses, shadows of figures, shadows of buildings. Everything's a shadow, but it looks so cool because the eye likes contrast. So when you have all these shadows in there, it means pretty much everything that's bordering on it is contrasting. Now you'll see me, this is where I'm thinking to myself, hey, this hand, something about it doesn't look right. And I'm trying to figure it out, and I'm going, well, maybe it's a little too big, maybe the shadow's not right, let me start making some adjustments, and you'll see me kind of go through there and make those changes. Now, what we are doing here, again, adding the details. I didn't like the way the arm initially looked, and as I look at this, there's a few things which I probably would have done differently. So I did make that right leg a shadow, but the way that leg bends, where it is, it's one of those things, I did it wrong. Do you know why, guys? Because that is actually, if I was to look at it realistically, it's anatomically correct. But remember how I said sometimes things that are anatomically correct don't look right on paper? If you look at it, it looks like that right leg is a lot shorter than it should be. But I'm telling you, it is correct. That is how the human body looks like. That right leg would be at that correct height. That knee joint would be right there. But that's because the leg's not going straight down. It's angled out. And also the hips are kind of tilted a little bit. So the right side is way below the left side. But on paper, that doesn't look right. So what I probably should have done is I probably should have taken that right leg, extended it out by just a little bit, and then made it start to look thicker on top of the knee, so that you can match the thickness of the left leg, that curvature that happens above the knee joint. You don't see any of that. So what it looks like her right leg is super skinny and her left leg is super thick. But again, it is anatomically correct, but it doesn't look like it is. So here's my fingers. Here's where I am struggling to do this correctly. So initially what I was going to have her do is kind of do an okay sign with her left hand, where like 3 fingers were extended out and then the top one was kind of curved around the actual spear. I couldn't get it to look right, so then I changed it up to this version here, which is just, basic shape. Like I said, we want to go for clarity. So if you're doing an okay sign, it doesn't look right, think to yourself, is this clear? Is it clear that I am actually showing a hand that's gripping something? One thing to remember too, common mistake is when and you'll see this all the time, professionals in comic books do this mistake, is they will take a hand, and whenever it's gripped around an object, they draw it like it's just a fist. Well, it's not a fist, because if you think about it, if you're holding a spear that, 1 inch in circumference, the joints do not wrap at the same level as if you close a fist, right? So it's something to remember. You've got to create a little bit of space in there. You've got to open it up a little bit, because if you made a fist, there's no shadow. When you open it up, there's a tiny bit of shadow. You'll see that below the left hand, and you'll see just a tiny bit. Maybe you can see it, maybe you can't, but that pinky is actually wrapped to the other side. So I did really basic background, and the reason is I wanted to make this look like a watercolor painting in the background, where I just had 2 colors, the sky, and I was going for this, amber, grainy, yellowish type of background, and basically representing, maybe she's standing in front of a field of hay, or a field of wheat or something like that, or maybe just tall grass. But I kind of got there. I started putting some details in, but I put details at the edges, and then I purposely left everything below just open, because I didn't want to compete with the painting, if that makes sense. I didn't want to have the background compete with the subject. So this is where I do my flats. I go back and forth. Sometimes I experiment with the skin tones. I went kind of a little bit, a little bit. I had some red in there as well, and I had to have a distinction between her clothes and her skin. But I wanted to have some basic colors here. I wanted it to be red. I wanted it to be kind of that light tan color, and then I wanted her skin to be right in the middle. Because what I wanted to have happen is I wanted to have a few things pop. So I wanted the headband to pop, and I wanted the feathers to pop. So I think I did a decent job of that. So my flats, what I do, I put I basically color like it's coloring book, right? And then from there, what I will do is once I've had I kind of touch every little place with color, then I go back and I add the details of the color. So I don't know why I decided to do it, but feathers are fun. So I did a lot of work with the feathers first. I had this, it's actually green, then I add some blue, then I add some yellow. And I just thought they looked kind of cool, these feathers. So I had a lot of fun doing them. Then I do my dark places. So all I do is I take whatever color I use for the skin and I just add about 10% more black to it. So when I do that, I go through all my dark spots right there. And then I also put the right hand as a little bit darker than the left hand. After I do my shadows, I do my highlights. And I do the complete opposite. I go about 10% lighter than the skin color. And I go through there and I hit kind of the high spots. And then I very gently erase little spots. I overdid it right there, so I had to go back. You saw that white spot just pop out. It didn't look right, so I had to go back and then adjust that a little bit. But all that's just me taking the eraser and erasing it down. And then from there, all I'm doing is I'm just adding a background. I put a little bit of brown, a little bit of yellow, a little bit of green, and then I had this bluish green backside in the sky. You can see me just doing one more look at it without just line work, adding in the color when I'm all done, and that's it, guys. Basically, that's a drawing. And if you liked what you saw here, try and recreate it. Take some time, draw your own Pocahontas. So it doesn't have to be Pocahontas. It could be any Disney princess. It could be Cinderella. It could be Mulan. It could be, is it Belle? Belle, yeah, Belle's my favorite. Little Mermaid. It could be any of those princesses. But yeah, it's something that's kind of nice. And then try using some of these concepts I've talked about. Put the structure in, add a little bit of detail, add a little more detail, erase, go back, base it kind of on human space, add a lot of shadows, have some contrast in there, and then go from there. Other than that, if you like some of these videos, feel free to check out. I got some quick draw videos you probably like, and it's basically all of this without the comments. So you get to see all the meat and potatoes without any of the fluff of me blabbing about how I draw. Other than that, thanks guys, I appreciate your time, and hopefully you like the video. See ya.